Good evening, folks. It is Wednesday, the 3rd of May. It's Cardinal Maria here, and this is the context session for educational management and leadership. Before we really get into things, I'm going to ask you indulgence. I have a bit of a throat infection. If I disappear off, or my mic goes dead for a couple of seconds, I humbly apologize, but I'm probably having a coughing fit, and I don't think I'd like to keep my mic on and expose you to that. Tonight's session, I'm going to get into the crux of the educational, the management, and the leadership, and specifically our educational management leadership, specifically the management and leadership part of it. Um, for those of you that may have a bit of a background in management and leadership in a different context, it is the approach in education and in higher education is slightly different than the approach is in other subjects that study it. And it would become abundantly clear very quickly to you within the first two or three slides that the approach that is followed in education in general and higher education more specifically has a different approach to management and leadership than other subjects that look at management and leadership. So I thought that as an introduction to the specific section, we should firstly look at what is the general conceptualization of management and leadership. Um, in management and leadership studies, leadership looks at the direction that the company takes. Leadership is seen as the most senior level in the organization. Um, the directorships, the senior directors, the managing director, and those senior managers that support them. And see, even myself, that come from a management and leadership background, says those senior managers that support them. Um, and one should be talking about the senior leadership that support them. But this is the top level in the organization. And this level determines where is the organization going, what are the goals in terms of the long term, and what should be done to achieve those goals. I want to just briefly stop at the long-term idea. Long-term is an interesting concept when we talk about planning, because long-term differs from organization to organization. You can think for yourself a bank that does 20-year bond loans. Their long-term planning must run for at least 20 years, if not longer. A company that's in IT and writing new programs or even new games, their long-term planning probably seldom runs longer than a year, maybe a year and a half, because it's such a quick changing environment. So just be careful when we talk about long-term planning in higher education. When we talk about long-term planning, we're probably talking 3 years, maybe 5 years. Um, it's a shorter time frame. I would say, depending on what you're planning, but I would say strategy seldom runs for longer than 5 years, especially in South Africa. So that's what leadership looks at. Management is the people that execute the planning, and they typically work on the medium and short term. Just to recall what I've said about the terms and what a medium and short term is. But they need to make sure that the day-to-day running of the organization is successful. And they also do planning, but it's not the same planning as leadership. It's a shorter term planning. Um, and they take care of interpreting the long-term vision, the mission, the strategic direction of the organization, and converting that in practical, executable plans that can be done within the organization and within the um, abilities of the organization to ensure that those goals are achieved, whilst also ensuring the long-term survival of the organization. Now, as I said, that is what, when one looks at a management and leadership course, these are the definitions that will be given to you in terms of what management does and what leadership does. So let us look at how this differs when we come to higher education and what higher education does. In higher education, management and leadership are almost seen as one and the same thing. Managers are leaders, leaders are managers. The distinction has disappeared to a large extent. It is seen that there's still a strategic level where certain things take place, certain long-term decisions are made. But when talking about management and leadership, where in large organizations we talk of it as two different things. I'm talking about large commercial organizations. When they talk about leadership in higher education, they talk about management. And when talking about management, they might well mean leadership. So they almost equated. And one must have sympathy why this is developed, because leadership starts taking place at a much lower level in the organization because of the way education is structured. Leadership and long-term planning takes place at a much lower level within the organization than it does in other commercial organizations. And I would argue that this is a particular influence that we've inherited from secondary education, where your leadership is your principal of the school. And the principal then has a deputy principal, various departmental heads, and so on and such forth. So you've got that perfect hierarchical structure with a person at the head of that organization, or the head of that school, virtually having the say about where the school is going and what the school is planning to do. And this idea has been taken on by higher education, where you have deans of faculties, and the deans of faculty determine what the faculty wants to do, what the priorities of the faculty is. Yes, they've got to bow to higher authority, and there's various levels of authority within higher education. But in essence, within the broad framework given to them by the big organization, those deans can manage and lead their faculties as they please. And this is then the situation that we sit with. So if you do come from a managerial background, do not make the mistake when reading about leadership or reading about management in higher education, to use the strict business management definitions, splitting, as I gave you right at the beginning, leadership into the upper level long term and management into the lower level shorter term, more operational. Don't make that mistake. You should equate the two to each other. As Günther said, the tag used to describe this field of study has altered over time from educational administration to educational management and finally to educational leadership. So we talk about educational management and educational leadership as one and the same. Now I want to direct you on this topic, because when we start looking at the second assignment, you'll find that you have to address the leadership and the management of higher education, and then you need to address certain specific problems. From the current assignments that I'm marking, and no, I haven't finished marking them. I'm hoping to do that this weekend. It's clear that many of you have only consulted those, six or eight prescribed works that I had a session on and so on. But if you look at, I referred you there to VC Learn and said also look at what's on VC Learn. When you go into the learning units on VC Learn, you will find that virtually each learning unit has its own group really, in most cases, there are a couple of duds, or a couple of, I shouldn't call them duds, a couple of sources that are not as good. There might be others that are better, but in general has its own set of prescribed material there. You'll see those as you scroll through the learning unit. There's the heading that says prescribed material, and they all these blue hyperlink documents. And as you click on them, it takes you to a variety of articles, documents, and all types of things. And you need to go through those as well, those in your assignments. To simply stick to the couple of legal documents that you've been given, and to want to build an argument around the changes needed in higher education, and you quoting stuff from 2013 and so on. It's simply doesn't cut the mustard at this level. So you must include more recent sources, and you must include additional sources. I'm fully aware that the assignment only counts asks for, I think it's 5 sources or something like that. And I haven't, and I will not penalize anybody that uses only those sources in terms of the sources used part. But the overall mark is going to be lower because you are not as expansive in your thinking. You are not addressing all the issues. So please, please, please go into VClearn, look at those blue highlighted documents, read those as a basis. I would want to say that is the pure absolute minimum of reading you can get away with. And for any one of these topics, I would say read much wider. Okay, enough of model ranting on that topic. I want to move on and look at models of leadership in higher education. And I think it's important to do this in the context of this specific course, because it is, after all, management and leadership. And the question arises, how do people lead within higher education? So in terms of, sorry, I want to just check. Yeah, I thought as much. I skipped one. In terms of higher education, there's a number of leadership styles. Gassame and Hussein wrote an article on this. The article is one of the hyperlinked articles. And there are other articles, and Gassame and Hussein also explains in the article that this is purely one of the models. They took it from, I think the gentleman was Brown. They took large parts of Brown's work. But there are different approaches. But Gassame and Hussein proposed the following, and although these are not, it doesn't cover all the bases, these are enough that to form a very good understanding of what management and leadership looks like in higher education, and what the various styles are. These styles are all linked, well, virtually all linked back to more formal managerial styles that would be used in a pure business management and leadership course. I have noted them where possible, just so that people understand that this is not, it's not unique to higher educational leadership, but it is an adaptation to higher education. So it's not used in its pure form. It is definitely an adaptation, or if you wish, an application to higher education. So the various models, we start with the formal model of educational management. So this is a formal model. In other words, the name of the model is the formal model of education. This is linked to the so-called managerial leadership style, where you have a manager that takes charge of a section, and they then determine what that section is going to do. So this is the most formal of the different styles. It presupposes a hierarchical structure. In the West, these structures are typically very high, sharp pyramids with many layers. Those of you that have been exposed to government service, for example, the last time I worked with government, I think there was something like 15 different levels in government, and each of them had 3 or 4 different notches, it was called in the old days. I don't know what they call it today. Giving you something like 45 different ranks, if you like to, and that's typical of a hierarchical structure. In the East, when one goes to places like Japan, specifically, that pyramid would be much shallower and much broader. So there'll only be 2-3 ranks, for example, between the lowest and the top rank. In the formal model of educational management, authority and power comes from formal positions. In other words, you have a certain rank or a certain title, and that gives you certain authority and certain power. You are then acknowledged and recognized because of the position that you occupy, not because of the knowledge or because of the years of experience, but because of the position. Your authority, your power, what you can do and what you can get others to do is all directly related to your position. Interestingly enough, in this model, they don't concern them too much with the vision, the mission, the strategic idea of the organization. It's more a question of using this. Organizations where this model is prevalent or places that use this model are more concerned with the effective and efficient day-to-day running of the organization, rather than saying, where are we going to be in 5 years' time? Let's sit down, let's do a proper strategic plan, and let's then roll this plan down through the different levels of the hierarchy. It's rather a question of, let's manage the system, and the system will look after us. So that's a formal model. We hear about collegiality, and I see I've made a typo there. It's obviously the collegial model of educational management. We hear about collegiality, working together as a team, as fellow teammates within education. Thus, this is linked more to the transformational, participative, and distributive leadership styles of management. Transformational leadership is simply trying to do the best thing that's the best thing for the organization and the best thing for the individual. Participative management has to do with discussing things, getting everybody's opinion, everybody's ideas, and it differs from people sometimes make the mistake to say participative. Participative management is typically the African style of management. It differs from Lekgotlas and so on in the sense that in participative management, groups make the decision, while in the African way, everybody participates, but it's still the chief that makes a decision after Lekgotla. If you want to do it, if you want to put it to African, you can start talking Ubuntu, if that's the direction you want to go. And it differs from, and then distributive leadership differs from transformational and participative, in the sense that rather than a single person leading, distributive leadership distributes the leadership throughout the organization. Each one leads in their area of expertise. Taking these together, we find the collegial model where discussion is made, or decisions are made through discussions, people talking about issues, and then either making a group decision or a leader making a decision in line with what the group has discussed and what the group consensus is. The problem with these styles, with this style specifically, but these type of leadership styles, you have to assume, and you have to have for it to work, with a commitment to the organizational goals and teams. So the individuals working in the organization need to be working for the organizational good, and through the organizational good, their own good. In other words, if I want to achieve greatness, the organization needs to achieve greatness. And I can only achieve greatness through the organization achieving greatness. these collegial models can work in that type of thing. The next model is the political model. In the political model, it's most closely aligned with the transactional model of leadership. Now, those of you with a background, or those of you that have done a bit of studies in management will know that the transactional leadership style has to do with leadership is a transaction. In other words, it's a monetary thing. You have to do this and I will do that for you. At the most basic level, you will deliver on your job and I will pay you a salary. So it's a transaction. We're not there because we want the organization to succeed necessarily. We're there because we want to make money. I, as a manager, as a leader, am there to make sure the organization succeeds. And how do I do that? I simply pay you enough money that you are successful. Position and power is the result of policy discussions and negotiations. And those discussions and negotiations are not necessarily always the formal ones in the political model. They can be informal things that happen. So you can have positional power, personal power, authority over resources, and these type of things. So if I'm the person that has got the ability to build you an additional wing to the set of classrooms that you use in higher education, that gives me a certain power over you. And if I'm executing those powers, then I'm acting within the political model of management in education, in higher education. So it's all about what power can I assert over somebody else? And do I have enough of that power to be able to control the elements within the sphere of the organization in such a manner that I can achieve the goals that I want to achieve, whether these are then my managerial goals and whether these are then my goals that I want to achieve for personal gain. That doesn't really matter in the political model. The fact is I am using the different powers that I have available, whether from the resources that I control, my position power that I have because I've been formally appointed, my personal power that might stem from experience, it might stem from education, or it might simply stem from some kind of a position or a respect that I have got for one or the other reason. And this can be a negative reason. I will use all those powers to achieve what I need to achieve. We move on to the subjective model of educational power, aligned with postmodern and emotional leadership styles. And this aims much more to the personal and the I will achieve what I want to achieve because I need to achieve that. In other words, you are looking at a leadership style here where people within this organization, or people using this type of style, are placing themselves above the organizational goals and above what's, never mind the organizational goals, even what is important to the organization and what ensures organizational health and survivability. They place their own personal goals and their own personal aims way above the organization's goals. Although this has been adapted to the educational management system, one should also keep in mind that this is something that we see a lot around us, specifically very prevalent within politics around the world, not just in our country or our continent, everywhere that we look. This happens in politics quite a lot. It's very difficult to manage this situation. Ambiguity model of educational management aligns with the contingency style of leadership, also with the idea of VUCA. If you're not sure about what VUCA is, please Google it, VUCA. Contingency style of leadership is my personal favorite style of leadership. It assumes that the world is ambiguous, it's uncertain, it's volatile, and we do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. Therefore, the leader cannot necessarily act in the long term. They can plan long term, but those plans are almost sure to be foiled, simply because the area in which we act, our surroundings change so quickly, and things happen so fast that we can't always rely on our plans. And then the leader within that situation needs to act according to what has happened, analyze the situation, and act in the most appropriate way. You the contingency style tells us, or the ambiguity model tells us that the best way to lead is to say, what is the current situation? What is the best solution in this situation? And then to act in the appropriate manner. And the we use the appropriate manner. We don't use the act in the right manner, because there is no right manner. There might be 4 or 5 ways in which you act, and you need to decide what is the most appropriate for the current and act in that way. Time will tell you whether it was the right decision to make at the time, and time will teach you about making decisions. But the fact of the matter is, you've got to determine what is the most appropriate now, after you've analyzed the situation, and then simply act in the manner that you believe is the most appropriate. The last model I want to look at is the cultural model. This is closely related to moral leadership, and this is where the ideas, the beliefs, and there's the whole life, ideas, beliefs, norms, values, attitudes, symbols, etc., form the basis of our actions. So it is almost as if there's a moral code, or a organizational culture, for lack of a better word, that determines how we act. And we act the way that we have acted very likely for many years. And you'll see this especially in traditional old universities. And these universities act in a very specific, and sometimes, unfortunately, archaic manner. We see a lot of this left over in some of our older universities in South Africa. If you look at the issues that Stellenbosch is having around race, and I actually don't think Stellenbosch's issues are as bad as some other universities. I think Potch has got issues around race that they haven't even discovered yet. And I'm not dissing any universities, I'm just saying as the way I see it. But there's a certain culture within that organization that is made up, and culture is made out of those second bullet things. And people act in that manner and are judged, their actions are judged against that manner. And if you speak to people that deal with organizational culture, as I have, they will tell you that culture is one of the most difficult things to change. And thus, in terms of the cultural model of educational management, it's something that takes a long time and is very difficult to change. And the danger is that when you start messing with culture, it simply means you're going to find a new culture emerging. No organization is cultureless. As soon as you've got a group of people that form themselves into any type of organization, some form of culture exists, sometimes very faint, sometimes very strong. And when you start messing with that culture to change it, a new culture must emerge. It cannot exist without a culture. The problem that you sit with, if you mess around, as the saying goes, mess around and find out, you might find out that you've added or ended up with culture that is even less desirable than the culture that you started with. Not saying cultural models are wrong, just saying cultural models need to be the right culture for the right time. Okay, folks, that's me having taken you through all the different educational management models that exist, and no, taking you through Gosemi and Hussein's cultural models that exist. There are many more. It's not just those. But I want to ask you, are there any questions? Anybody want me to clarify anything? I'll put my email address, as I always do, up there. I welcome emails from students, and I try to answer them as soon as possible. But any questions? Anybody want to ask anything? Anybody wants to make any comments about tonight or anything else that you want to find out from me? Please go for it now. Okay, guys. It doesn't seem like anybody's got any questions for me. I will see you again week after next. Hopefully, in the next week or so, we'll be able to release the thanks, Nolonipo. Sorry. We'll be able to release the results within the next week or so. I'm doing my best to get it out to you as soon as possible. I want you to be able to look at the feedback I've given you before the next assignment is due. I believe the next thanks Nomsa, the next time we speak, which would be 2 weeks from now, I think is the next prep session for the second assignment. I will at that stage split that prep session into 2 parts. The first session I will talk to this assignment and what I've seen and what are problematic and what was really well done. And then I'll talk to the prep for the next assignment. Okay, guys, if there's nothing else, I'm going to bid you a good night. Keep warm, keep well, and we'll speak next time.